Hello, my name is Reva Goujon, and today I'm joined by my colleague Lauren Goodrich to discuss two highly consequential and controversial geopolitical figures of our day, Putin and Erdogan. So, Lauren, I'm basically bracing myself for the Sunday referendum in Turkey, and this is a very important referendum for Erdogan to extend his political tenure, really enhance his presidential powers. Once he hit his term limit as prime minister, he was very creative in finding a way to basically go beyond the bounds of his formal powers and still be very strong as president. But now he's in the act of formalizing those powers in a big way. And, you know, when he can actually extend, if he actually gets a yes in this referendum, he has the potential to remain president of Turkey until 2029, a very lengthy timeline. And it's interesting when we compare these two, Erdogan and Putin. It's not a perfect comparison, but there are certainly a lot of parallels, even starting just with the tactics they've used to hold on to power.
Very much so. I mean, we saw Putin, of course, in 2008 do the little switcheroo with Dmitry Medvedev, in which he took the premier seat so Medvedev could be president. And within Medvedev's initial presidency decisions, he ended up extending the presidency for when Putin came back. It wouldn't be a 4-year term, it'd be a 6-year term. So we now could likely have Putin through 2024. Not as long as Erdogan, but 2024.
They're sticking around, right? And so, when we look at these two individuals, and this was something that I was discussing in a recent piece, I think it's very easy in the West for us to look at Putin and Erdogan, look at these power grabs, and condemn them as tyrants and call it a day. But I think there's something more to it, right? It's much harder to empathize with these figures and understand what actually shapes their worldview, both from a personal level and a geopolitical level.
Geographical level, yeah.
Absolutely. And these are two figures whose geographical sphere of influence overlap in many ways.
And both are countries that are East and West.
Absolutely. And it's split between Europe and Asia. And it's sort of this duality, this identity crisis that they both have to contend with in a big way. I mean, I know from Erdogan's perspective, he came up from a very poor upbringing, very resentful of the more, Western established elite, and this very Europeanized elite that looked toward Kemalism as the secularism as a model for Turkey, whereas, he definitely felt that Turkey has a stronghold in the East and looking to the Islamic world, and that was not something to be neglected, that, he had to sort of re-engineer the system and bring more of his people, in his mind, into the corridors of power. And there was sort of that, it's our time now. And that's what he's trying to hold on to. He's trying to hold on to that time.
Yes. I mean, for Putin, he grew up in Leningrad, so today St. Petersburg, which deeply felt the savageness of World War II in the siege of Leningrad. And his parents were caught up in that. He lost an older brother due to illness because of the siege. And so he was raised in a family that really felt the ravages of war, but also really villainized the West because of Germany's invasion of Russia. And so Putin was raised in a very poor family with that idea of the West really being that enemy number one to the strength of Soviet Union and Russia. And so it's very interesting to juxtaposition that to what he ended up doing within the KGB, when he worked for the KGB, when he was in Germany, because that's the very country that invaded his home. But he was there to steal technology. And so he really understood how far advanced the West was in comparison to the Soviet Union. And so when you have someone like that come to power, they know that they need to, A, re-strengthen Russia, B, really make sure that the West is enemy number one and is on, outside of your country. But C, also really modernize your country and try to get back into the game with the West and be able to compete with the West.
Right. And not just sort of copy and paste a model from the West and say, okay, this is our solution. Both Putin and Erdogan reject that as a solution. And it's funny how both view democracy more as a tool a means to an end. And it's interesting when you look at these two figures and they both feel that they're saviors of their country. They legitimately feel that if they're out of the picture, this whole thing falls apart and that their entire nation is at stake.
And the Russian people believe that as well.
Or a good portion of them, at least, right? In Turkey's case, it's more polarized. I mean, it's really split down the middle in those who believe that Erdogan is their patron, is their savior. But given that, the sort of egoism that goes into that worldview, these power grabs are seen as, an extension of that, right? That if you can basically find the means to stay in power, you're doing it for the sake of your nation, lest, the West encroach on you and weaken you from within.
Well, I think that for Vladimir Putin, that he's facing a really big challenge right now, though, because we're starting to see the generational change take place inside the country. And so for him to run for president next year, we're seeing over a quarter of the population born after the fall of the Soviet Union and only know Putin as their leader. And that population is not as accepting of Putin being the savior because they didn't know Russia when it was falling apart in the 1990s. And so we're seeing a Kremlin that's trying to figure out what to do next. How, the model that they've kind of run off of for 17 years now isn't going to work for this next generation. And so I feel that we're going to start seeing shifts come out of the Kremlin, both in ways to try to embrace this younger generation, but also ways to crack down and make sure that younger generation can't topple the entire system that they built.
I mean, it's a generation that has social media at its fingertips, right? To consume information, also to put out information. There was a very interesting transcript of a discussion within a school outside of Moscow, just showing, the difference, the vast difference in perception between an older generation, the teachers and the principal, and the students who say, look, we've only known one leader our entire life. And we're willing to allow democracy to work and see it function, right? For better or for worse.
What was interesting about that conversation was that the student wasn't actually anti-Putin.
Right.
He was just anti the system of just only having one leader for Russia. And so it's a different kind of mindset than saying, oh, well, this is a very liberal new population that's coming in. That's not what it is. It's just because they're not anti-Putin himself. They just want to see the system actually work as a system.
And they don't necessarily see, a Putin, and Erdogan faces the same challenge. This leader, the longer they are, if you try to stay in power for more than a generation, you're going to face a generational challenge sooner or later. And if they don't see them as their savior, that presents a much more formidable challenge in trying to crack down in these years ahead, even if they can re-engineer the system to stay in place. So two very interesting men that we really obsess over here at Stratfor and watching their geopolitical moves, but also trying to understand them, from a personal level of what shapes their worldview. Thank you, Lauren, for the discussion, and thank you all for joining us.